The small apartment felt emptier than usual as Mai stood in her mother's bedroom, surrounded by cardboard boxes and memories. It had been 3 weeks since the funeral, but only now did she find the courage to sort through her mom's belongings. The morning light filtered through the dusty curtains, casting gentle shadows on the faded wallpaper. Her fingers trembled as she opened her mother's old wooden jewelry box. The familiar scent of sandalwood brought tears to her eyes. Among the modest collection of jade pendants and silver bracelets, something caught her attention, a corner of yellowed paper peeking out from beneath the velvet lining. Curious, May carefully pulled out what turned out to be an envelope, sealed and addressed to her in her mother's elegant handwriting, "For my daughter when I'm gone." Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to find anything like this. Taking a deep breath, she sat on the edge of her mother's bed and opened the envelope. The paper inside felt delicate, like it might crumble at any moment. As she unfolded it, a photograph slipped out and landed on her lap. The photo showed her mother, younger and radiant, standing beside a tall man in an expensive suit at what looked like a corporate event. Her mother's hand rested protectively over her slightly swollen belly. She was pregnant. Mai picked up the photo with shaking hands, studying the man's face. He had kind eyes and a gentle smile, nothing like she had imagined during all those years of wondering. She turned back to the letter and began to read. "My dearest daughter, there are truths I've kept hidden, not out of shame, but to protect you. Your father isn't dead, as I've led you to believe. He is alive, and his name is Richard Zhang, founder of Zhang Technologies. We met 15 years ago when I was an intern at his company's research division in Hong Kong. Those 3 months were like a dream. Richard was different from other CEOs, humble despite his success, passionate about innovation, and kind to everyone, regardless of their position. We fell in love, but our worlds were too different. When I discovered I was pregnant, his company was in the middle of going public. The board members were pushing for his public image to be perfect, and a scandal would have destroyed everything he built. I made the choice to disappear without telling him about you. Perhaps it was wrong, but I wanted you to have a normal life, away from the pressure and scrutiny that comes with such wealth and power. But you're older now, and you deserve to know the truth about your heritage. Inside this box, you'll find documents that prove everything I've written. What you do with this information is your choice. Know that I've never regretted having you, my beautiful daughter, even if the path I chose was difficult." May sat there, stunned, as pieces of her life suddenly shifted into new positions. Her mind raced with memories, the way her mother worked 2 jobs to put her through school, their tiny apartment in the immigrant neighborhood, the nights she'd catch her mom looking at old photographs with tears in her eyes. Working as a waitress to pay for her evening classes at the community college suddenly felt surreal. Somewhere out there, her father was a billionaire. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands and searched for Richard Zhang. Thousands of results appeared instantly. News articles, interviews, photos of a distinguished-looking man cutting ribbons at tech conventions and giving speeches at prestigious universities. In one recent photo, he stood proudly next to a young woman who shared his features, his legitimate daughter, the article explained. The successful COO of Zhang Technologies' Asian division. May felt a strange mix of emotions seeing her half-sister for the first time. That evening, sitting at her small kitchen table with a cup of cold tea, May spread out everything she found. More photos. All newspaper clippings about Zhang Technologies' rise to success. A worn business card with her mother's name and an old company email address. Each item felt like a piece of a puzzle she never knew she was meant to solve. Her phone buzzed with a reminder about tomorrow's morning shift at the coffee shop. The contrast between her reality and what could have been felt dizzying. But as she looked around her modest apartment, at the photos of her mother on the walls, at the second-hand furniture they'd picked out together, she felt a surge of determination. She opened her laptop and began researching flights to Hong Kong. The upcoming tech conference, there would be her chance. Richard Zhang never missed it, according to all the articles. She had just enough savings to make it work. As she booked the ticket, her hands steady now, she realized there was no turning back. Looking out her window at the city lights, May thought about her mother's courage all those years ago. Now it was her turn to be brave. She wasn't after money or revenge. She just wanted answers, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to know the other half of who she was. In her mother's letter, one line stood out: "What you do with this information is your choice." Tomorrow, she would put in her 2 weeks' notice at the coffee shop. In 1 month, she would be in Hong Kong, ready to uncover the truth about her family, no matter what secrets she might find. The Hong Kong International Airport buzzed with activity as May wheeled her small suitcase through the arrival gates. The familiar smell of milk tea and dim sum from nearby shops brought back memories of visiting relatives during childhood summers. But this time was different. She wasn't here for a family vacation. Her phone contained weeks of research about Zheng Technologies and its founder. She'd spent countless nights after work reading everything she could find, watching old interviews, and piecing together the puzzle of her father's life. The Richard Zheng she discovered was fascinating, a self-made billionaire who started his company in a tiny apartment, not unlike the one she lived in now. Finding an affordable hotel in the bustling Mong Kok district, May unpacked her single suitcase and spread her research materials across the small desk. Tomorrow would mark the start of the Asian Technology Summit, where Richard Zheng would give the opening keynote speech. She'd managed to get a pass by volunteering as an event helper. It had taken 3 application attempts and a recommendation from her community college professor, but she'd made it. Looking out her window at the neon signs illuminating the evening sky, May recalled a video interview she'd watched dozens of times. In it, Richard spoke about losing his wife, Lynn, in a car accident 5 years ago. The pain in his eyes seemed genuine, and the way he spoke about family values made May wonder if he would have wanted to know about her had her mother told him. But there was another figure in her research that made her nervous: Sophia Zheng, her half-sister. Every article painted Sophia as a business prodigy who had modernized Zheng Technologies' operations. At just 30, she was already being called the Princess of Asian Tech. But something about her perfectly curated public image made May uneasy. In every photo, Sophia's smile seemed calculated, her eyes cold despite her designer clothes and flawless makeup. The next morning, May stood in front of her hotel mirror, smoothing down her only professional outfit, a navy blue blazer bought from a thrift store and carefully altered to fit. Her mother had taught her that presentation matters, especially in Hong Kong. She pulled her long black hair into a neat bun, applied light makeup, and practiced her volunteer badge introduction one last time. The convention center was massive, its glass walls reflecting the morning sun across Victoria Harbour. May's hands trembled as she checked in at the volunteer desk. She was assigned to help with registration, which meant she would see everyone who entered the main hall. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw Richard Zheng's name on the VIP list, scheduled to arrive in 2 hours. As she helped direct attendees to their designated areas, May observed the crowd. Tech entrepreneurs, investors, and journalists from all over Asia filled the space. The air buzzed with conversations in multiple languages about artificial intelligence, blockchain, and the future of technology. It felt surreal to think that somewhere in this world of innovation and wealth, half of her DNA came from one of its most prominent figures. Then she saw him. Richard Zheng walked through the main entrance, surrounded by an entourage of assistants and security personnel. He looked exactly like his photos, tall for an Asian man, with gentle eyes behind designer glasses and silver streaks in his black hair. He moved with quiet confidence, stopping occasionally to greet old friends and colleagues. May's throat went dry. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her head, but now that it was real, she felt frozen. Just as she gathered her courage to approach him, another figure appeared beside him, Sophia Zheng, dressed in an impeccable white suit, her presence commanding immediate attention. Sophia's sharp eyes scanned the room like a radar, settling briefly on each face before moving on. When her gaze passed over May, something flickered in her expression, curiosity, perhaps, or recognition. May quickly looked down at her tablet, pretending to check registrations, her heart pounding. During the lunch break, May finally saw her chance. Richard had stepped away from his entourage to answer a phone call in a quieter corner of the networking area. With trembling legs, she approached him, clutching her mother's old photograph in her pocket like a talisman. "Mr. Zheng?" Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have something important to show you." He turned, his kind eyes focusing on her face. For a moment, he seemed startled, as if seeing a ghost. Before Mai could reach for the photograph, a sharp voice cut through the air. Dad, the investors are waiting. Sophia appeared suddenly, placing herself between them. Her perfectly manicured hand gripped her father's arm possessively. I'm sorry, she said to May, not sounding sorry at all, but all media requests need to go through our PR department. I'm not media, May started, but Richard was already being led away, casting one last curious glance over his shoulder. Later that evening, back in her hotel room, May sat on the edge of her bed, feeling defeated but not broken. She pulled out her mother's photograph again, studying the happiness in both her parents' young faces. Something about Richard's reaction gave her hope. That moment of recognition, however brief, told her that somehow, deep down, he might have seen her mother in her face. Her phone pinged with a notification. An email from an unknown address. Meet me tomorrow, 9 a.m. Happiness Coffee Shop, Stanley Street. Come alone. I know who you are. The sender's name made her catch her breath. David Chen, Deputy Director of Operations, Zhang Technologies. The morning sun cast long shadows across Stanley Street as May approached Happiness Coffee Shop. Her heart raced with each step, wondering if this meeting was a trap or a genuine opportunity. The traditional cafe stood between modern high-rises, its faded red awning and steamy windows a reminder of old Hong Kong. Inside, the smell of fresh bread and brewing coffee filled the air. Early morning regulars hunched over bowls of congee and newspapers. In the corner, a young man in a well-fitted business suit sat alone, checking his watch. He looked up as May entered, and their eyes met. This must be David Chen. Thank you for coming, he said as May sat down across from him. His voice was quiet but friendly. I ordered you milk tea. I hope that's okay. My grandmother used to say you can trust someone who drinks Hong Kong milk tea. May wrapped her hands around the warm cup, studying him carefully. How did you find out about me? David smiled, but his eyes were serious. I've worked at Zhang Technologies for 8 years. I handle sensitive information for Mr. Zhang, including his personal matters. Yesterday, when you approached him, I saw his face. I've never seen him look so shocked. Then I saw your volunteer application photo and he pulled out his tablet, showing her side-by-side images of her mother and herself at the same age. The resemblance was striking. So you did some digging, May said, taking a sip of her tea. I had to. Sophia has been aggressive about protecting the company's image and her inheritance. David leaned forward, lowering his voice. 3 years ago, another person came forward claiming to be Mr. Zhang's child. They disappeared overnight, took a large payment and signed an NDA. But you're different. I can see it in how you carry yourself. You're not here for money. May's fingers tightened around her cup. There were others. David nodded grimly. Mr. Zhang wasn't always the person he is today. In his younger years, when the company was just starting, let's just say Sophia has been very thorough in eliminating potential threats to her position. But she made a mistake this time. What mistake? She didn't delete everything about your mother. There's still a photo in the company's old servers from a research team dinner. Your mother is there, sitting next to Mr. Zhang. The date matches everything. He paused, watching her reaction. I want to help you, May. Not everyone at Zhang Technologies agrees with how Sophia runs things. May sat back, processing this information. Why would you risk your position to help me? David's expression softened. My father abandoned our family when I was young. When I see Mr. Zhang now, he's not the same person he was before his wife died. Sophia's control over him, over everything, it's not right. He deserves to know he has a daughter who actually wants to know him, not just his bank account. Over the next hour, David shared what he knew. Sophia had been systematically removing any trace of her father's past relationships, using company resources to track down and silence potential claims to the Zhang fortune. But more disturbing were the rumors about Mrs. Zhang's accident 5 years ago. The brake lines had been cut, but the investigation was quietly closed after generous donations to several police charities. You need to be careful, David warned, checking his phone. Sophia has eyes everywhere. She's hosting a charity gala at the Peninsula Hotel tomorrow night. Your father will be there. It might be your best chance to speak with him privately. I can get you in as part of the event staff. Just then, his phone buzzed with a message. David's face paled slightly. Sophia's called an emergency board meeting. I have to go. He slid a small envelope across the table. Everything you need is in here. Security passes, staff uniform details, hotel layout. There's also a USB drive with copies of the photos I mentioned. Be careful where you plug it in. Sophia monitors the company networks. As David stood to leave, May caught his arm. Why did you really reach out to me? He hesitated, then said quietly, because 5 years ago I saw something I shouldn't have. The night before Mrs. Zhang's accident, Sophia was in the company garage, late at night. I've lived with that knowledge ever since. Maybe helping you is my way of making things right. After David left, Mai sat for a long time, watching the morning crowd thin out. The envelope felt heavy in her hands, heavy with possibility and danger. She thought about her mother, who had chosen to walk away to protect her. Now Mai had to choose whether to walk forward, knowing the risks. Back in her hotel room, May laid out the contents of the envelope. The staff uniform would be waiting for her at the hotel tomorrow. The USB drive contained not just the old company photos, but financial records showing suspicious payments from Sophia's personal accounts to various offshore entities around the time of Mrs. Zhang's death. As evening fell over Hong Kong, May stood at her window, watching the city lights flicker to life. Tomorrow, she would walk into the Dragon's Den, a luxury hotel filled with the city's elite, where one wrong move could expose everything. But she wasn't alone anymore. For the first time since arriving in Hong Kong, she felt a glimmer of hope. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Everything set for tomorrow. Be careful. Trust no one else. She deleted the message immediately, remembering his warnings. Somewhere in this glittering city, her father was probably preparing for tomorrow's gala, unaware that his long-lost daughter would be serving champagne to his guests, waiting for the right moment to change both their lives forever. The Peninsula Hotel's grand ballroom sparkled like a scene from a dream. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over Hong Kong's elite as they mingled, their jewelry and watches catching the light. May adjusted her black server's uniform for the 100th time, trying to calm her nerves as she balanced a tray of champagne flutes. Remember, David had told her during their brief meeting in the staff area, Mr. Zhang always steps out to the garden terrace at 9 for a phone call to his Silicon Valley office. That's your window of opportunity. Now, watching the ornate clock on the wall tick towards 9, May carefully navigated between clusters of guests. She'd spotted her father earlier, looking distinguished in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. Sophia hadn't left his side all evening, expertly steering him from one important conversation to another. 8:55. Mi's heart jumped when she saw Richard Zhang excuse himself from a group of investors. Right on schedule, he headed toward the terrace doors. This was it. She set down her tray and followed, keeping a careful distance. The night air was cool and fresh compared to the crowded ballroom. String lights twinkled in the carefully manicured garden, and the Hong Kong skyline provided a glittering backdrop. Richard stood alone by the railing, phone in hand. May took a deep breath and approached. Mr. Zhang? Her voice was barely above a whisper. He turned, recognition flickering across his face again. Ah, you're the young lady from the conference. I'm sorry about yesterday. My schedule has been quite hectic. Mi's hands shook as she reached into her pocket. Sir, I need to show you something. It's about Lai Wai-chen. The color drained from Richard's face at the mention of her mother's name. Mai pulled out the old photograph, the one showing her mother pregnant at the company event. Richard took it with trembling fingers. Why, he whispered, tracing the image with his thumb. I searched for her, you know, after she disappeared. But she'd left no trace, changed her number, moved away. He looked up at May, really seeing her this time. You're her daughter. I'm your daughter too, May said softly. Time seemed to stop. Richard stared at her, his eyes filling with tears as he saw what everyone else had noticed. How much she looked like him, like her mother, like the past coming back to life. She never told me, he said, his voice rough with emotion. All these years. She wanted to protect me, May explained. And you. The company was going public, and she thought, Father. Sophia's sharp voice cut through the moment like a knife. She stood in the terrace doorway, her red designer gown catching the light. What's going on here? Richard quickly wiped his eyes, but he didn't let go of the photograph. Sophia, this is another gold digger trying to scam you. Sophia strode forward, her heels clicking on the stone terrace. Security has already been called. This woman snuck in using fake credentials. That's not true, May protested, but 2 security guards were already approaching. Mr. John, please. Wait, Richard said, his voice firming. She has proof. This photograph could be photoshopped, Sophia cut in smoothly. Daddy, remember what Dr. Wu said about your blood pressure. Let me handle this. She turned to the guards. Please escort this imposter out and call the police. We'll be pressing charges for trespassing. No. May pulled out her mother's letter. Please just read this. One of the guards grabbed her arm, making her drop the letter. As she was pulled away, she saw Sophia pick it up, her red-painted nails crumpling the paper. Mr. John, May called out desperately. Ask David Chen about the company photos from 15 years ago. Ask him about your wife's accident. The last thing she saw before being dragged through the service entrance was Richard Jung's face, confusion and pain etched in every line, and Sophia's expression of cold fury. Outside, the guards released her roughly onto the street. Her uniform was wrinkled, and she could feel tears streaming down her face. She'd been so close, had seen the recognition, the beginning of acceptance in her father's eyes. Now it was all ruined. The morning headlines hit like a thunderbolt. Corporate spy attempts to infiltrate Zhang Technologies. Mai stared at her phone in disbelief, seeing her blurry photo from the gala splashed across business news websites. The articles painted her as part of a sophisticated corporate espionage ring, targeting Zhang Technologies' upcoming quantum computing project. They've frozen my bank account, she told David over a secure messaging app he'd installed on her phone. Her hands shook as she typed. My landlord back home just called. Someone offered to buy my apartment building, but only my unit needs to vacate immediately. Sophia's trying to pressure you to leave Hong Kong, David replied. Stay at the Golden Guest House on Temple Street. The owner owes me a favor. She won't record your name. The tiny room at the guest house felt safer than her hotel, even with its squeaky ceiling fan and narrow window overlooking the busy market below. Mai spent hours watching people haggle over fruits and trinkets, wondering how her simple wish to know her father had exploded into this chaos. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. A new article had appeared, claiming she had a history of fraud. Somehow, Sophia had manufactured evidence of previous scams, complete with fake victims telling sub-stories about how that girl had conned them using similar tactics. We need to move fast, David messaged. I've been tracking Sophia's digital footprint. She's getting sloppy in her panic. Found some interesting transfers to offshore accounts right after Mrs. Zhang's accident. But we need access to her private laptop to prove everything. A knock at the door made Mai freeze. She crept to the peephole, relieved to see the elderly guest house owner with a tray of hot tea and dumplings. You look tired, child, the old woman said kindly. Eat something. Bad things don't seem so bad with food in your stomach. As Mai ate, she scrolled through her emails. Her part-time college professor had sent a concerned message. Someone had accused her of cheating on her exams. The cafe where she worked had terminated her employment due to customer complaints. Her entire life back home was being systematically dismantled. Got something? David messaged later that evening. Sophie is holding a private board meeting tomorrow at the Harborview offices. She always brings her laptop. I can get you in through the service entrance, but what? Security will be tight. If you're caught this time, Sophia will have you arrested. No more warnings. Mai thought about her mother, who had given up everything to protect her. Now it was her turn to be brave. Tell me what to do. The next morning, Mai found herself in a cleaning staff uniform, pushing a cart of supplies through the gleaming halls of Zhang Technologies' Harborside offices. David had timed it perfectly. Most employees were in the board meeting, leaving the executive floor nearly empty. Sophia always leaves her laptop in her office during meetings. David's voice crackled through a tiny earpiece. You'll have 15 minutes while the cleaning system is malfunctioning in the boardroom. Mai slipped into Sophia's corner office, taking in the stunning view of Victoria Harbour. Family photos lined the walls. Sophia and Richard at company events, award ceremonies, charity galas. In every image, Sophia stood possessively close to her father, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. The laptop sat on the glass desk. May plugged in the USB drive David had given her, her heart pounding as files copied. A sound in the hallway made her duck behind a large potted plant. 2 security guards walked past, radioing about a disturbance in the lobby. "Someone's coming up the executive elevator," David warned through the earpiece. "Get out now." May grabbed the USB drive and had just reached the door when it swung open. Richard Jung stood there, staring at her in surprise. For a long moment, neither moved. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally, his voice quiet. "I had to show you the truth," May replied, clutching the USB drive. "About everything. About your wife's accident." His face darkened. "What about the accident?" "Dad." Sophia's voice rang down the hallway. Security said there was an intruder. She rounded the corner and stopped short, her perfectly composed face cracking with rage. "The police are already on their way," Sophia snapped, pulling out her phone. "This time you've gone too far." "Wait," Richard said, holding up his hand. He was looking at May intently. "What do you know about my wife's accident?" "Show him," David said through the earpiece. "Now or never." May pulled out her phone, playing the security footage David had recovered. The grainy video showed the company garage 5 years ago, Sophia in the shadows, tampering with her stepmother's car. Richard's face went pale as he watched. That can't be," he stammered. "It's a fake," Sophia said quickly. "Obviously doctored." "Like the brake lines were doctored," May asked quietly. "Check the USB drive. There's proof of everything. The offshore payments, the other children you paid off, the falsified accident report." Security guards burst from the elevator, but Richard raised his hand again, his voice shaking. "Everyone stop. Sophia, explain this. Now." May watched Sophia's perfectly crafted world begin to crack. In that moment, standing in the luxurious office high above Hong Kong, she felt no triumph, only sadness for her father, whose life was about to change forever, and even a flicker of pity for Sophia, whose fear of losing control had led her down such a dark path. The truth was finally emerging, but May knew this was just the beginning of an even more difficult journey, one that would test not just her courage, but her capacity for forgiveness as well. Rain pelted against the windows of Richard Jung's private office as he sat behind his desk, looking older than Mai had ever seen him. The security footage played on loop on his computer screen, showing Sophia in the garage that fateful night. The room felt heavy with unspoken words and painful revelations. "I've called the police," he said finally, his voice rough. "They're reopening the investigation into Lynn's accident." He looked up at May, who stood nervously by the door. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." May settled into the leather chair, watching her father's face. In the past hour, everything had changed. Sophia was confined to her office under security supervision, while David worked with its specialists to secure all the evidence. "Your mother," Richard began, picking up the old photograph from his desk. "Wei was special. Different from anyone I'd ever met. She saw me as a person, not just an ambitious businessman." He smiled sadly. "She used to bring me tea when I worked late, tell me stories about her grandmother's village. I thought when she disappeared, maybe I'd imagined how real it was." "She never stopped loving you," May said softly. "She kept every news article about your success. She just wanted to protect everyone from scandal." Richard nodded, wiping his eyes. "And instead, my own daughter, my firstborn, she's been." He couldn't finish the sentence. "The investigators found more, not just Lynn's accident. Other potential heirs, threatened or paid off. Business rivals who mysteriously backed down. All these years, I thought Sophia was protecting our company's interests, but she was protecting her position," May finished quietly. "I failed her," Richard said, staring out at the rain-soaked city. "After her mother died when she was young, I threw myself into work. Sophia learned to equate love with control, success with power. And Lynn, she tried to help, to be a mother to Sophia, but—" A knock at the door interrupted them. David entered, looking grave. "Sir, the police are here. And there's something else you need to see." He placed a laptop on the desk, opening emails and financial records. The evidence was damning: years of manipulation, blackmail, and carefully orchestrated accidents. But what caught May's attention was a folder labeled Y. Chen. Sophia knew about me, she whispered, reading through the files. She's been tracking Mom for years. She knew where we lived, where I worked. Tears filled her eyes as she realized the extent of the surveillance. Richard's hands clenched into fists. All this time, she kept this from me. My own daughter, he looked at May with pain-filled eyes. And my other daughter, living just across the city, working in a cafe. The door burst open. Sophia stood there, flanked by police officers, her perfect composure finally cracking. You're choosing her, she spat, glaring at May. This nobody? I built this company with you. Everything I did was to protect what we built. No, Sophia, Richard said, standing. You destroyed what we built. Every value I tried to teach you, every principle this company stands for, you twisted them all. He nodded to the officers. Take her. I'll have my lawyers contact you shortly. As Sophia was led away, her expensive heels clicking on the marble floor, she turned back one last time. For a moment, May saw something flicker in her eyes, not anger, but fear. The fear of a little girl who had learned the wrong lessons about love and power. I never meant, Sophia's voice cracked. Daddy, I just wanted to make you proud. To keep our family safe. Richard's face softened slightly. Family isn't about control, Sophia. It's about love. Something I should have taught you better. He watched as his eldest daughter was escorted to the elevator, shoulders squared even in defeat. After she was gone, Richard sank back into his chair, looking exhausted. The board will have to be notified. There will be investigations, legal proceedings. Our stock will take a hit. He smiled wryly at May. Not exactly the family reunion you imagined, I suppose. May thought about her mother, about the choices she'd made out of love. Mom always said that truth, no matter how painful, is better than living with lies. David cleared his throat from the doorway. Sir, the press is gathering downstairs. They'll want a statement. Richard stood, straightening his tie. Then let's give them one. But first, he turned to May, his eyes soft. Would you like to have dinner with me tonight? Just a father and daughter getting to know each other. May felt tears spring to her eyes. I'd like that very much. As they rode the elevator down together, preparing to face the media storm, May caught their reflection in the polished doors, father and daughter, standing side by side. Two people bound by blood but separated by choices made long ago, finally finding their way back to each other. The truth had emerged, bringing both justice and pain. But as the elevator doors opened to face the flashing cameras and shouted questions, May felt her father's hand squeeze her shoulder gently. Whatever came next, they would face it together, not as CEO and coffee shop worker, but as family, rediscovering what that word truly meant. 6 months had passed since the truth exploded across Hong Kong's headlines. The autumn air was crisp as Mai stood in front of her mother's grave, placing fresh flowers beside the headstone. Her father stood quietly beside her, his hair a little grayer, but his eyes warmer than they'd been in years. She would have loved these, Richard said, touching the white lilies. Wei always said flowers speak louder than words. He pulled out an old notebook from his coat pocket. I found this in my storage last week. Your mother's research notes from her internship. Her handwriting was so neat, just like yours. May smiled, thinking about how much had changed. The small apartment where she'd grown up was now filled with boxes. She was moving to a new place, closer to Zhang Technologies' headquarters, where she'd started working in the community outreach division. Not because of nepotism, but because of her idea to create the Family Reconciliation Foundation. The lawyers called this morning, Richard said as they walked through the cemetery. Sophia's case is proceeding. She's agreed to psychological counseling as part of the plea deal. He sighed heavily. She's been writing letters from the detention center, asking to talk. May squeezed his arm gently. Maybe someday, when she's ready, when we're all ready. The foundation had become their shared mission, helping families separated by circumstances find each other again. David, now promoted to Chief Operations Officer, had been instrumental in setting it up. They'd already helped 3 families reunite, including another child of a tech executive who'd never known their father. The board meeting went well yesterday, May said, changing the subject. The new ethical guidelines for corporate governance were approved unanimously. No more secret payments, no more buried files. They reached their car, where their driver waited patiently. These days, May was still getting used to such luxuries, but she'd insisted on keeping her old coffee maker in her office. Some mornings, she'd make Hong Kong-style milk tea the way her mother taught her and share it with her father while they talked about everything and nothing. The car wound through the streets toward Richard's favorite dim sum restaurant, their weekly tradition now. As they sat at their usual corner table, Richard pulled out another surprise, a small, wrapped package. "Open it," he urged, looking nervously excited. Inside was a nameplate for her office door, May Chen Zhang, Director of Family Reconciliation Foundation. "You're adding Zhang to your name?" May asked, touching the engraved letters. "Only if you want to," Richard said quickly. "I just thought, well, you're part of both families, just like I'm learning to be part of yours." May felt tears well up, remembering all the times she'd wondered about her father while growing up. Now here he was, sharing dim sum and memories, trying so hard to make up for lost time without erasing the life she had with her mother. Later that afternoon, they visited the Foundation's new office. The walls were lined with photos. Families reunited, stories of hope. In pride of place was the old photograph of her mother and father at the company event, now framed alongside a recent picture of May and Richard at the Foundation's opening ceremony. "Sometimes I wonder," Richard said, looking at the photos, "if the truth hadn't come out that way, would I have ever known about you?" "Mom always said truth finds its way home," May replied. "Like water flowing downhill, you can block it for a while, but it always finds a path." A young woman was waiting in the reception area, their newest case. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap as May approached. "Welcome to the Family Reconciliation Foundation," May said warmly. "Would you like some tea while you tell us your story?" Richard watched from the doorway as his daughter sat with the woman, offering the same comfort and understanding that Wei had once shown him during those late nights at the office. In his pocket, he touched the one photograph he always carried now, his reminder that family could be lost and found, broken and healed. That evening, as the sun set over Victoria Harbour, May and Richard stood at the office window. The same view that had once witnessed family secrets and corporate schemes now watched over new beginnings. On May's desk, a framed quote from her mother caught the fading light. "Love doesn't divide when shared, it multiplies." "Ready to go home?" Richard asked, using the Cantonese phrase her mother had taught him. May looked at her father, this man who had learned that wealth meant nothing without family, who was trying every day to be better than his past mistakes. She thought of Sophia, struggling with her own demons in detention, and hoped that someday they too might find a way to be sisters. She thought of her mother, whose love had been big enough to let go and wise enough to leave a path back. "Yes," she said, gathering her things. "Let's go home." As they left the office, the city lights began to twinkle on, each one like a story waiting to be discovered. Tomorrow would bring new families to help, new truths to uncover, new chances to prove that it's never too late to find your way back to love.